SG2 and therefore SG2 Perspectives are being rebranded. As a listener, there's no action needed for you to keep this podcast in your subscriptions and feeds, but you will see a new logo and a new name. SG2 Perspectives is being renamed Edge Perspectives. Same great host, same great content. We're going to expand the way we cover data-driven market intelligence, quality, and operations. This is Edge Perspectives, a weekly conversation about the biggest insights that span market intelligence, quality, and operations with the Vizient Strategy Intelligence team and other experts.
This is part of our outpatient portfolio update, and it's a bit of a preview. The expert-driven visits are growing 23% over the next decade. The non-expert visits about 18 or 19%. They're both experiencing significant growth. That's a lot. If you're already struggling for access, knowing that that will increase further is important.
Welcome to Edge Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I have my colleague, Justin Cassidy from Vizient Strategy Intelligence joining me. We're going to talk through the academic medical center landscape, a place that Justin pays really close attention to. And moving into our summit over the summer, he's preparing a bunch of content for that. I'm not going to ask him to spoil any of that, but I want to hear some of the big themes that he's hearing from the many academics that he works with and talks to all the time. Justin, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks so much. Always a pleasure, Trevor.
Justin, in a previous episode, Tori and Carol walked through the new impact of change forecast. One of the biggest trends was how historic volumes growth rate has slowed from something that we didn't even forecast, double digits year over year. It's coming down a little. That was pent-up demand in hospitals adapting their ability to capture it. Talk historically about, did AMCs see the exact same pattern, and how's it impacting your expectations going forward for them?
We don't create an academic medical center focused forecast. We do offer the tertiary grouper. We release every year as part of the Vizient Strategy Intelligence team. We call it our inpatient portfolio framework. A part of that is creating and sub-segmenting lists of DRGs that are quaternary, tertiary, or shifting tertiary, and they're shifting away from traditional academic medical center hubs to spokes in either academic systems or community hospitals. Essentially, it's an acuity-based forecast. Every year, we break out the inpatient discharges. We can see that tertiary and quaternary growth is much higher than non-tertiary quaternary discharge growth. This year, we break it out, seeing 28% 10-year growth in tertiary quaternary DRGs, as opposed to negative 4% decline those non-tertiary quaternary discharges. That forecast bifurcates quite an extreme way from what is modest overall inpatient growth if you break out by acuity.
I love it. Thanks for framing it that way. For everyone else's knowledge, so many people know the inpatient and outpatient portfolios, and we use them across our team. That's just in creation, and it's something that's been fun to see how you've evolved it over time and added more and more detail and depth to it. Members get a lot of value there.
This is a team-based endeavor. Over 50 individuals across Vizient weigh in on these updates every year, have roles in pulling the data, contributing clinical expertise. We have every one of our service line colleagues weigh in, double check, vet. These lists are starting points for our members to engage with their teams and say, this list might not be perfect, but it's much better than coming up with it de novo. And it's really based on deep expertise across Vizient that we're leveraging. I'll give a huge call out to Dr. Maddie McDowell. She is really instrumental in undergoing our final clinical review. Eric Lamb and our colleagues Angela and Victoria and the Vizient Research and Analytics Insights team for their excellent data science contributions to this. We could not do it without them.
Justin, can you further segment that growth that we've seen historically? Is it similar between academics and non-academic systems? With that forecast being so different, I'm guessing the historic was pretty different too.
What's interesting, Trevor, is the historical is not so different. This is an odd thing to say, but we can look at Vizient CDB data, and this is very important, something that no one else can do, and we have never done it at Vizient. We can actually break out the continuously reporting facilities in the Vizient clinical database over the last decade. In this case, we looked from 2022 to 2025. This is important because then it's a stable set of facilities. We can then classify those facilities as to whether or not they belong to academic or non-academic systems. If you've held with me for that long, we can say the number of discharges of those facilities, is that growth similar or different? The growth for both tertiary and non-tertiary quaternary procedures is essentially equivalent between academic and non-academic systems. The reason is that academic systems have been full. Even though they can rightfully grow those procedures because they have more expertise than the non-academics, they have only been able to accommodate a certain level of growth. That level of growth is in lockstep with what they have successfully decanted from their facilities in order to accommodate more strategic tertiary quaternary procedural growth. This is thinking about potentially avoidable admissions and the like, serving those with patients in outpatient settings, performance improvement and the like to decrease length of stay to accommodate more elective procedural growth. The non-academic systems have been able to capitalize because they've had capacity historically to grow. For non-academics and for academics, they're all reaching capacity. And the academics are above the game in terms of initiating performance improvement capabilities. The growth from here on out will be more centered at academic versus non-academic systems. The past also does not predicate the future, and overall, there'll be less inpatient growth than what we've seen historically, which is also important. Our forecast is not a simple regression. It also reflects this idea of there being a limited amount of ongoing capacity. A lot will continue to shift outpatient.
There's a lot of threads there that I want to pull on further. I'm going to start with a huge one, which is how academics have got command of capacity management, but they've also done a terrific job being strategic about what they backfilled with.
I give huge kudos for our academic medical centers across the country. They've always been full from a capacity crunch perspective. We've talked about this for over 10 years at Vizient. They have done a stellar job moving out of COVID, repositioning command centers to command capacity and couple quality and performance improvement initiatives with that capacity planning. And we can point anyone who's interested to recent blog posts from our Vizient leadership team showing that quality improvement and performance improvement initiatives, which some may consider to be new cost centers or anything but, they increase financial performance in addition to increasing capacity for more procedural growth. That's a really interesting and important insight. And the performance improvement actually yields in financial improvement as well. That's where we're seeing huge gains. From a patient perspective, we should all be very happy for this because what's already stellar low mortality rates for inpatient discharges has declined further. Disproportionately academics versus non-academics, but across the industry, this has been decreasing, which is a huge call out to if you measure and improve it, it actually happens. It increases the benchmark for further improvement, but it's a great thing overall. We also see much decreased average length of stay, particularly for elective procedures. So a huge opportunity for continued tie-ins to command capacity. One of the most important insights that we've seen from our members in terms of what is being asked is we've decanted what do we actually backfill with from a procedural perspective. And here we always point to that shifting tertiary cohort, cases that have moved from the academic medical centers to other spoke facilities within either their system or within other academic systems and say, maybe we could move some of those back that were perhaps shifted quickly, but perhaps have quality minimums to maintain that performance. And it might be better to consolidate those at a single hub facility. Things like thoracic surgery or any sort of incredibly invasive procedure, it just makes a lot of sense to have a larger multidisciplinary team as opposed to distribute those throughout all acute care facilities within an overall system. It might be dangerous to do them at community centers that have very low volume procedures. You have activities like transplant, it makes sense they consolidate at certain centers. Gene therapy is another. That's where we might see that further consolidation and strategic backfill.
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. I want to go on a couple different tangents with you. One thing I've heard some progress in, you have a bigger sample than me, so I want to hear what you've heard, how academics are working on access. Faculty practice model, it's an easy thing for them to point to small primary care networks as this is a pain point for us that doesn't have an easy solve, but I've heard some starting to tackle it, expanding APPs, thinking about community practice models too. What have you heard? And more importantly, are academics talking about this as an unsolvable problem or something where they feel like they have line of sight to making a positive impact?
Access is huge. Enabling is the most important rate limiter to further growth for academics. There's some interesting stats you can pull here. Academic systems do by far and away more E&M visits as a part of their outpatient portfolio mix than non-academics. That might be surprising. It's actually their outpatient distribution of clinical activity. It's about 18% E&M visits. Non-academic systems, it's about 10%. What's done at the HOPDs. So huge difference. And that's because there are more experts in more niche areas, academics. They're all centered at the academic HOPD. There's already an increased burden. The further the increase over the next 10 years, this is the highest volume outpatient type of activity.
One other thread I want to pull on is around access, a place everyone has been committing a lot of time, energy, and resources, thinking what access strategy is today versus what it's going to be in the future. Academics, it's always been harder because of the faculty practice model, small primary care networks. How are they making progress in access?
Access, particularly for academic systems, is the largest opportunity and the largest risk as we think about strategic assessment. It's always the case. Access enablement, particularly in the outpatient side, is the rate limiter to growth in both outpatient and inpatient strategic discharges and procedures. It simply is. The upstream is what's at stake here. If we lose that upstream because we can't get patients in a timely manner, the downstream referrals to those procedures that our hospitals are doing an excellent job with performance, particularly on the tertiary quaternary side, it still does matter if you get a facility that can scale. Costs are often less because the multidisciplinary teams are able to scale further. You think about procedures like thoracic surgery, transplant, even gene and cell therapy. It makes a lot of sense to do them at consolidated centers that are most often academics. Upstream, those E&M visits are often challenging for academics to accommodate in a timely manner. When patients receive referrals or any sort of need for E&Ms at academic system, it's often much larger wait times than non-academic, just for that upstream visit. Here's some stats to quantitate that potential risk at academics. E&M visits, if you look at the total outpatient volume composition at academic versus non-academic systems, at academic systems, E&M visits compose 18% of total outpatient volumes, whereas at non-academic systems, it's only 10%. That's pretty striking, right, Trevor?
I haven't heard that stat from you before, and that's really shocking.
This stat is something we've never been able to measure at Vizient. I've never seen this measured anywhere in industry. This is part of what our crack team of data scientists are able to now pull out. We've added in a system cohorting scheme that we're hoping to release to our members later in the year. We think it's going to be very valuable. We sort of assess every facility clustered into the systems and then actually do a total system assessment as opposed to break it out by Vizient QA hospital cohort type, which is a different measure of acuity. Community hospitals can be a part of academic systems. Here we bundle those different facilities, all the different types of hospitals into a system type. And those academic systems are struggling much more with visit accommodation than non-academics. In terms of that total volume breakout that I shared, but we can actually also break out the visits that require more expertise. They're more likely to happen to academics, and those that require less expertise. This is part of our outpatient portfolio update, and it's a bit of a preview. The expert-driven visits are growing 23% over the next decade. The non-expert visits about 18 or 19%. They're both experiencing significant growth. That's a lot. If you're already struggling for access, knowing that that will increase further is important. But it's going to be even more of a disproportionate increase at academics, which already have more of a disproportionate baseline. It's going to be more of a struggle, and it already is one.
And I know how much work you've done in this space to help us add precision to these analyses, and it's pretty cool to see the product of that. If I was a chief strategy officer in an academic system, what should I do about access based on that?
First off, up the ante and advanced practitioners, make sure they're all working at the top of their license. Think about not just faculty practice, but also the advanced practitioners as a part of the team. And in many cases, it's over half the clinical team at this point. So enabling alignment modalities with the advanced practitioners is important. The other is thinking about different alignment mechanisms between the gown and town faculty practice. Providers, particularly proceduralists that are operating at procedure hubs within the community, might require different types of physician alignment mechanisms. Next up, thinking about having individual visits, but thinking about scalable encounters, things like group visits or even asynchronous encounters, things like email visits, important. And then finally, scaling different types of activities that are very common that occur across service lines, like pain management or even pharmacy consultations. Perhaps those don't have to be led by physicians within an individual subspecialty, but could be a part of an enabled team of other clinicians that can manage those at scale. The other most final is the role of AI in all of this.
Like so many of these topics, that's a 2-hour discussion. But talk a little bit about clinical innovation, clinical trials, and about the theme of the academic health system. So many are not just standalone. They're part of bigger systems with multiple community hospitals. How's that impacting clinical trials and access for patients?
First off, the clinical trial front is moving from traditional drugs to cell and gene therapies, and then also artificial intelligence. They're both the promise and peril of it. The promise clearly for research and AI is the recruitment of patients into clinical trials in a much more rapid manner. It includes the medical review of patients' entirety of their electronic health records to determine whether or not they are or are not a candidate for that clinical trial. That used to take individual clinical review, perhaps months for patients to be determined whether or not they were candidates or not. Now it can take seconds with artificial intelligence. That decreases the rate limiting step to clinical trial fulfillment, which is recruitment. Then heightens the pace of the trial success. On the flip side, we see artificial intelligence. Perhaps was just at a large academic medical system in the South. They had undergone, unfortunately, a cyber attack that put them out of commission for several weeks and brought them back to pen and paper. It was a huge, arduous endeavor. Their junior clinicians had never even experienced a non-EHR first-based medical practice model. So knowing and understanding that that could be a crisis in the future, it's something to plan for, is important. As a part of training, make sure to include that traditional pen and paper as a part of training. That over-reliance could be important. The other areas we see are continued drive, particularly academics, of surgery to pharmacy shift. It can be more higher end clinical cases, things like hemophilia, thinking about the transition from what was procedural innovation to more curable gene therapy. Instead of factor replacement therapy recurring through infusions, now it's perhaps a one and done gene therapy cure. The other is more obvious, the decline in bariatric surgery because of anti-obesity medicines. In academics, we also see conventional bread and butter procedures like appendectomy turning towards a antimicrobial first-based medical practice. Instead of surgical resection, perhaps thinking about medical management first. We're seeing bifurcations in clinical practice between academic and non-academic. It's not necessarily a clinical trial per se, but it is a bifurcation that is important to consider as we think about the continued strategic growth and what will matter.
Justin, it's always so exciting to talk with you about any topic you're passionate about. You bring so many new analyses, insights, and data to the table. Thanks as always for sharing your perspective. Look forward to having you back again soon.
Anytime, Trevor.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Edge Perspectives, a podcast from Vizient. If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, please reach out to us using the email address in the show notes.